This is the one that always goes in the trailer. It's, yeah, I stole Rain from, the method for doing Rain from Quick Fingers, who's an awesome Unity dude who I'm now fortunate enough to work with. And it's cool. It's a big epic moment. This is much like those falling platforms earlier on. This is kind of one of those big semi-scripted sequences because the pace is defined by the water. So therefore, I know that if a player is surviving, they are playing through at a certain speed. And it's cool. It also builds on the idea of carrying from earlier, but this time under pressure, so you have to move quicker and you haven't got time to think. And if you try and get Thomas off of Claire, you're going to run into problems very quickly. So there's that as well. So it's hopefully kind of a nice way of solidifying all the learning the player's done about Claire up to this point.
Was she more the lone Avenger type? Oh, she'd like that. The sole hero in a world of rectangles and conveniently placed pools of toxic water.
Steps. I'm so sorry. On the upside, two things. One, I changed the shape of the steps, which I feel kind of massively improves them. And two, I then sarcastically make a joke about steps in the script. So you can laugh with me at my lack of design ideas up to this point.
The others told Claire that staircases were a bit of a fixture here. Claire wondered why the world made it so difficult.
This is one of my favourite levels. What's nice about this level is it breaks the thinking and learning you've done up to this point. So up to this point, I've been teaching you that Claire is for carrying other characters. If I'd not done that, this level would be a lot easier. It's because you've been told to carry characters for every level up to this point, your automatic reaction to a body of water is to jump Claire in and pile up all your characters, and that's not the solution. I love the fact that this puzzle kind of only exists in the head of the player. And it's great watching, Let's Plays and when I was doing playtesting and taking it to events and stuff, that you actually see people performing the action you've taught them to do of getting the characters on top of Claire, and then realising that's not the solution, that the solution is much simpler than they think. And there's only a few places in the game I managed to pull that off, but I'm really, really happy with this one. music. David came in, well, actually, he came in pretty early. Basically, the original Flash game had no music, and one of the biggest criticisms was that there was no music. There were no sound effects either. So I had to get someone, and I kind of fortunately found David through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And he did a cool little demo, which is now actually over the end credits. And he was awesome. I got him in. He wrote this amazing piece of music for each kind of chapter of the game. Basically, the way we worked is I would send him kind of the emotional script for the game of, you know, how the character's feeling, what's the setup here, and he'd work from that and kind of build a piece of music. About halfway through development, I made his life a lot harder because I decided I wanted a randomized procedural system. So you'll never hear the game too obviously loop. They're basically little sequences of music that kind of get piled up in interesting ways. And he was really good. He was really good with that. He split up what he'd already made and made it work, and then every track from that point on used that system really, really well. So he was really adaptive, and he's awesome. And he's like, man, that music. David came in, well, actually, he came in pretty early. Basically, the original Flash game had no music, and one of the biggest criticisms was that there was no music. There were no sound effects either. So I had to get someone, and I kind of fortunately found David through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And he did a cool little demo, which is now actually over the end credits. And he was awesome. I got him in. He wrote this amazing piece of music for each kind of chapter of the game. Basically, the way we worked is I would send him kind of the emotional script for the game of, you know, how the character's feeling, what's the setup here, and he'd work from that and kind of build a piece of music. About halfway through development, I made his life a lot harder because I decided I wanted a randomized procedural system. So you'll never hear the game too obviously loop. They're basically little sequences of music that kind of get piled up in interesting ways. And he was really good. He was really good with that. He split up what he'd already made and made it work, and then every track from that point on used that system really, really well. So he was really adaptive, and he's awesome. And he's like 14. Well, he's not 14, but he's very young, and it frustrates me how talented he is. I had a really good time working with him. So thank you, David. So this is an attempt to do a puzzle with kind of multiple solutions. This again was one of the very early levels I made. It was more of a kind of a test level originally, just to kind of check that all the characters were interacting correctly, the platforms were working the way I wanted them to. And it's cool because everyone has a different way of doing it. There's lots of ways of, you know, optimally doing it, but then there's lots of ways of also doing it in kind of cool show-off ways, which is nice. It's a good chance actually to talk about the backgrounds. So the backgrounds I was going to do kind of, you know, much like the shadows, I was kind of going to do specific bespoke level backgrounds, and it was working all right. They didn't look great, mainly because I just wasn't spending enough time on them. This is a 100 level game, and it just wasn't working. So in the end I did kind of a procedural system. So they're freeze-framed particle effects. So basically I draw them all off from a batch of images, place them at different parallax depths, and just go with it. So hopefully that kind of gives everything a nice texture, and kind of I think it brings all the levels together, and it means that every time you play a level it looks a bit different, which is fun. This is where I introduced spikes. I needed a hazard. I needed two things. I needed a hazard that Claire couldn't get past, so not water, basically, something that she could get hurt by. And I also needed a hazard I could put on ceilings. I did actually try, because it's all in a virtual world. I was like, oh well, it's fine. I'll have upside down water, and it looked rubbish, as I'm sure you'd expect. So the spikes got added. I introduced them specifically just with Claire, just so you can, as a player, learn that Claire is actually going to be damaged by them, and it kind of just changes the relationship a little bit between Claire and the environment, and hopefully in a safe way. This level's pretty straightforward.
Not the rubbish red kryptonite either, the proper radioactive green stuff.
I've got two versions of the commentary for this level. The first version is that, from a narrative perspective, I needed to establish that there was an intelligence to the system you're in, that there were negative forces, and I needed to disrupt the flow of play in order to make you aware that that was there. So a glitch kind of made a lot of sense, and it's kind of something the Matrix does deja vu quite a bit to kind of show you that something's been changed, and that was cool. The other version, and the more honest version, was that I had a very, very near deadline in order to take the game to a festival, and I had to have another level. I don't know why I'd set myself an actual kind of level count. No one was judging me or questioning me. 29 levels would have been just as good as 30 levels, but I did, and this was a nice way of reusing that map. Once I'd made it, I kind of assumed I'd always remove it, but once I'd made it, I actually thought it was quite cool, and there's a few little tweaks. So the moving platform moves a little bit faster, and obviously Thomas is there. So I kind of liked actually reusing the same space with different characters as kind of a way of twisting a puzzle. I didn't want to do it too many times in the game because I figured, people would just feel I was being a bit cheeky and not making enough content. But it was a nice thing to just do once and to just see how that mixed things up. It's only as we record these that I'm realizing quite how much I played the new character, but you can't use them properly yet card. I do it all over the place. So in this moment, this is obviously Laura is introduced and deliberately separated out from Chris. It's nice because it lets us kind of learn who Laura is before we start interacting with her, and kind of it gives some context to what the interaction that she has with the characters later. So that's hopefully quite fun. I do this far too much, and I need to not do this in future projects. Well, not as much.
Hang out. As long as he didn't find out what she could do, which would never happen so long as they stayed separate.
Pixel clouds were something I worked on early on. It was one of those weird ones where I had the idea for it kind of art-wise before I actually kind of worked out how to use them in the game itself. So I thought it would be cool to have these big swirling kind of pixel shapes. And they looked cool, and I made them, and then I kind of had to work out where they were useful. And actually, this was the point where I developed the game in semi-chronological order, so I just kind of had the issue where I wanted to convey that the world was kind of turning on the characters a little bit. And it made sense to use the pixel clouds as an enemy to kind of show that the world was negatively kind of fighting back against their progress a little bit. And here it's a build-up, so the whole purpose of these levels is to kind of just slowly introduce the pixel cloud, kind of make the player more and more aware that they're a threat, and their relationship changes. So right now they're just watching, they're just there every now and again, they're glimpses, and they become more important as the game goes on. Okay, so this level is, again, it was a kind of a test level that I made that kind of later became something that was actually really useful and interesting in the game. The point of this level really is just to get you used to the idea that that Laura changes people's jump heights. That's basically it. It's done earlier in the portal placement. You hopefully kind of half got it, but I just don't want to assume that you did. So here you have to actually kind of work out that bouncing actually kind of helps you progress. It's nice, it kind of gets you to learn it, it's safe, there's no threats, and yeah, it's cool. I liked it, I thought it was nice. I also didn't realise actually at the point where I was making this level that Laura and Chris were a perfect match, and I kind of played with that a bit more as it went on. I struggled to work out different puzzles involving Laura because basically she makes things jump higher. That's a limited kind of scope, and one of the very kind of the cool ideas I had, I think, with Laura was specifically to keep her separate from the play space, so she couldn't interact directly with characters, but to have enough of her kind of poke out of a wall or be available to the other players that they could interact and get a benefit from her. And it allowed me to do things like this level where you have kind of an indirect relationship spatially with between the two characters. And I really like it, actually. I think it's kind of interesting. I'd have liked to have done a few more of these.
She'd wonder what he was up to. Was he missing her? He wasn't saying very much.